The candle's flame flickered weakly, casting restless shadows against the cracked walls of Arin's small apartment. The room was shrouded in an eerie stillness, the kind that pressed against the soul like a forgotten weight. Arin sat hunched over the wooden desk, fingers tracing absent patterns on its worn-out surface. Sleep had eluded them again. It always did. Every night was the same, the dream. A voice, neither distant nor near, whispering through the void, calling their name with an urgency that sent shivers down their spine. But no matter how much they tried to respond, their voice would fail, their feet would remain frozen, and the dream would end in the same suffocating silence. Arin exhaled sharply, rubbing their temples. "It's just a dream," they muttered to themselves, though they knew it was a lie. It was never just a dream. The voice lingered even in waking hours, a ghostly echo in the corridors of their mind. It carried something unspoken, something Arin had spent years trying to ignore, an answer they feared, a truth they were not ready to confront. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with memories, a childhood laced with disappointment, a betrayal that still burned beneath their skin, the unshakable guilt of choices made, of roads taken and lost. Every mistake, every failure, every rejection was a chain wrapped around their soul, tightening with each passing day. It didn't matter how far they ran or how much time passed. Arin was trapped. Trapped in the ruins of a life that felt like a punishment. A sharp knock at the door shattered the silence. Arin's heart jumped, an unnatural dread settling in their chest. It was past midnight. Who would come at this hour? They hesitated before slowly making their way to the door. The hallway beyond was empty, but at their feet lay an envelope. No address, no name. Just a thin, off-white paper, its edges worn, as though it had traveled a long way to reach them. Arin picked it up carefully, their pulse quickening. Stepping back inside, they sat down, staring at the letter as if it held something forbidden. A deep breath, then another. With hesitant fingers, they tore it open, unfolding the delicate parchment inside. The words were written in flowing ink, yet something about them felt eerily familiar. "My precious child, if you are reading these words, do not turn away. Pause for a moment and draw near. I long to embrace you with a peace that surpasses all understanding. Let go of the distractions that pull at your mind. Settle your heart in my presence." Arin's hands trembled. Voice. It was the same voice from the dream. Their breath came in short gasps as they continued reading, each word sinking into their bones like a long-lost melody. "You are not alone in your struggles. I see the weight you have been carrying, the silent battles, the burdens that press upon your heart. But you were never meant to bear them alone. Come to me, and I will lift the heaviness from your shoulders." Arin's vision blurred. Who had written this? How did they know? They clenched the letter, their minds spiraling. It was absurd, impossible. Yet, deep down, something in them knew. This was not a mere coincidence. This was a message meant for them. The letter continued. "Let me be your refuge, your safe place, your source of unshakable hope. My strength is made perfect in your weakness, and my grace is more than enough for you. You have been running for too long, my child. It is time to stop. It is time to remember who you are." A sob tore through Arin's throat, unbidden, raw. No one had ever spoken to them like this. No one had ever seen them not like this. Not beneath the armor they had built, not beyond the walls they had carefully constructed over the years. And yet, whoever wrote this letter saw them completely, knew their pain, knew their struggle, knew the battle they fought every waking day just to keep breathing. They turned the letter over, searching for a signature, a clue, anything. But there was nothing except a final line, inked in steady, unwavering strokes. "If you are ready for the truth, follow the path that has already been set for you. Trust, and you will find what you have been seeking all along." And below that, an address. Single location. No name. No sender. Just a destination, a choice. Arin swallowed hard, staring at the paper as if it might disappear. Their hands shook as they traced the words over and over. Every instinct screamed at them to burn the letter, to throw it away, to forget this ever happened. But the whisper, the voice, was louder now. The chains around their soul loosened, if only just. This was it. A moment of reckoning. A choice between remaining shackled to their past or stepping into the unknown. And for the first time in years, Arin felt something stir deep within them. A flicker of something fragile. Oh. Arin sat motionless, the letter still clutched tightly in their hands. The weight of its words pressed against their chest, heavier than any burden they had carried before. Was this real, or just another cruel trick? Doubt slithered into their mind like a serpent. What if this was some elaborate deception? What if following this path only led to more disappointment? They had spent a lifetime hoping, only to be left empty. What if they weren't worthy of change? The thought struck them deep. They had spent years believing they were beyond saving, that whatever light once existed within them had long since flickered out. Guilt, shame, and regret had built an unshakable fortress around their heart, and now, for the first time, something was asking them to let it all go. Could they? Would they? Arin exhaled sharply, fingers trembling as they folded the letter. The address burned in their mind, an invitation that felt both terrifying and inevitable. But still, they weren't ready. Not yet. That night, sleep remained elusive. Every time Arin closed their eyes, the same voice echoed in their dreams, not just calling them but pleading with them. Follow the path that has already been set for you. By morning, exhaustion clung to them like a second skin. The air in the apartment felt suffocating, thick with unspoken words and ghosts of a past that refused to fade. A sudden knock shattered the silence. Their heart leaped. Slowly, cautiously, they made their way to the door, dread curling in their stomach. Standing on the other side was a man, tall, with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see through the very fabric of reality. His presence was unsettling, yet strangely comforting, like the calm before a storm. "Arin," he said, voice smooth and knowing. Arin stiffened. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "My name is Elias. I've been waiting for you." A cold wave of unease swept through Arin. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elias tilted his head slightly. "Don't you?" Arin's throat tightened. "You received a letter," Elias continued, stepping closer. "And now you're standing at the edge of a decision that will change everything. But you hesitate. You are afraid." Anger flared inside Arin. "I don't even know you." "You don't need to," Elias said simply. "I know you." Arin's breath hitched. "I know the weight you carry," Elias continued. "The nights you spend lost in the past. The war you fight inside your mind. You fear that you are beyond redemption. That the mistakes you've made, the pain you've endured, have already sealed your fate." Arin's chest ached. "You don't know anything about me." Elias studied them for a long moment before speaking again. His voice gentle yet firm. "There are forces at work beyond what you see. You have a choice to make. You can remain shackled to what has been, or you can take the first step toward what could be." Silence stretched between them. Arin felt exposed, as if this stranger had reached into their soul and pulled out every hidden scar. "The path has been laid before you," Elias said. "But only you can decide whether to walk it." Arin looked away. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Elias said, "but only if you are willing to leave behind what no longer serves you." Arin clenched their fists. They wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous. Had led to pain before. Elias seemed to sense their turmoil. He took a step back, offering a small nod. "I won't force you," he said. "But if you choose to come, meet me at the train station before sunset. If you don't, the choice is yours to remain here." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street as if he had never been there at all. Hours passed, and still, Arin remained frozen in indecision. Elias's words echoed in their mind, clashing against their fears. You can remain shackled to what has been, or you can take the first step toward what could be. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Arin found themselves staring at the letter once more. The choice had already been made. Even if they didn't fully understand why, their heart knew. They grabbed their coat and rushed out the door. The train station was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, the air thick with the scent of rain on pavement. People moved around them, each lost in their own world, unaware that Arin's entire existence was shifting beneath their feet. Elias stood near the platform, watching as Arin approached. "You came," he said, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Arin swallowed. "I don't know why." "You don't need to," Elias replied. "Not yet." The train's whistle sounded in the distance, a call to the unknown. Arin hesitated. This was it. The moment before the leap. Fear clawed at them, whispering that it wasn't too late to turn back, to return to the familiar pain they had always known. Elias placed a hand on their shoulder. his grip firm yet reassuring. Sometimes, he said, the first step is the hardest. But it is also the most important. The train pulled into the station, its doors sliding open. Arin's pulse thundered in their ears. This was the point of no return. With one final breath they stepped forward. And just like that the journey began. The train ride had been long, stretching over countless miles of empty landscapes. Arin had watched as the city faded into the distance, replaced by rolling hills and dense forests that seemed untouched by time. The further they traveled, the quieter the world became, as if it were preparing them for what was to come. Elias had spoken little during the journey. He sat across from Arin, eyes closed, as though he were somewhere far beyond this train car. And Arin, despite the uncertainty clawing at their mind, found they didn't need words. Something inside them was shifting. When the train finally slowed at a remote station, a place that barely looked like a stop at all, Elias stood. "We're here," he said simply. Beyond the platform, a narrow dirt path cut through the dense woods, disappearing into the trees. There were no buildings, no roads, no signs of civilization. Arin hesitated. "Where exactly is here?" Elias turned to them, a knowing glint in his eyes. "The place where you'll find what you've been running from." The words sent a chill through Arin, but they stepped forward anyway. The retreat was deep in the heart of the forest, hidden from the world. It wasn't a traditional building, just a collection of old stone structures, blending so seamlessly with the landscape that it seemed as though the earth itself had built them. As they entered the clearing, Elias finally spoke again. "You'll stay here alone." Arin turned sharply. "Alone?" Elias nodded. "No distractions, no escape. Just you. And the truth." Panic flickered in Arin's chest. "I don't." "You must," Elias said. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was unyielding. "You cannot heal if you do not first face what has broken you." Arin clenched their fists, their body stiff with resistance. But deep down they knew Elias was right. So they said nothing. Elias studied them for a moment, then placed a single object in their hands. A small silver key. "This will open the door to the main cabin," he said. "Inside you'll find everything you need." Arin looked down at the key, its weight feeling far heavier than it should. "How long will I be here?" they asked. Elias smiled faintly. "As long as it takes." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees, leaving Arin standing alone in the fading daylight. The first day passed in a haze of silence. The cabin was simple. One room, a wooden bed, a small desk. No phone, no books, no clocks, just a single candle for light. Isolation settled over Arin like a suffocating fog. First they paced, then they tried to sleep. But the stillness made their thoughts louder, their heartbeat heavier. And then, the memories came. Unrelenting. A father's disappointment. "You'll never be enough." A friend's betrayal. "You really thought I cared." A lover's departure. "I can't do this anymore." Failure. Guilt. Shame. They came like a tidal wave, crashing over Arin with no mercy. Every wound they had buried resurfaced, raw and unhealed. Every regret played on repeat, each one cutting deeper than the last. Arin curled up on the wooden floor, fingers clawing at the fabric of their shirt, gasping for air. "Stop," they whispered. But the past didn't stop. It never stopped. By the third night, Arin felt hollow. They had spent hours staring at the ceiling, trapped beneath the weight of memories that refused to fade. The candle had long since burned out. Darkness wrapped around them, thick and oppressive. And then, "Why do you fight it?" Arin froze. That voice, the same one from the dreams. It was here, in the silence, in the very air around them. "You have carried these burdens for so long." A sob clawed its way up Arin's throat. "I don't know how to let them go." "Then stop trying to carry them alone." Tears burned in Arin's eyes. "I don't know how," they whispered. "Yes, you do." A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, though the windows remained shut. "Surrender." The word sent shivers through Arin's entire body. The voice had never commanded, never demanded. It invited. But surrender meant trust. And trust meant opening the very wounds they had spent their life trying to close. Arin's breath trembled. "I can't." "You can." Arin clenched their fists. "You are not your pain." Sob broke free. "You are not your past." Arin's vision blurred. "You are not alone." And for the first time in years they believed it. With a shaking breath, Arin did the one thing they had feared most. They let go. And the chains began to fall. The night was thick with silence, pressing against Arin's skin like a second layer of flesh. The fire in the small cabin had burned down to embers, casting a dull glow against the wooden walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a haunting stillness that made the air inside feel heavier. Arin sat on the floor, knees drawn to their chest, staring at the faint orange flicker of dying flames. They had thought they were making progress. They had faced their past, allowed themselves to feel the pain they had spent a lifetime burying. For a brief, fragile moment, it had felt as though something inside them had cracked open, like a locked door finally left ajar. But then doubt came, creeping in like a shadow stretching across the floor. What if this is all for nothing? The thought slithered into their mind before they could stop it. What if you are beyond saving? Arin squeezed their eyes shut, pressing their palms against their temples. The weight of their past had begun to lift, yet it still clung to the edges of their soul, waiting, for a moment of weakness to drag them back down. What if this was a lie? What if they had imagined the voice? What if none of this was real? Their breath turned shallow, their heart pounding against their ribs like a prisoner begging for escape. Panic gripped them. They could leave, right now. No one was stopping them. The door was unlocked. The path back to the train station wasn't far. They could return to their old life, pretend this never happened, pretend they were fine. A violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin walls, shaking the windows. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate, drawing closer. The door creaked open. Arin's head snapped up, breath catching in their throat as a shadow entered the room. It was Elias. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, eyes glinting in the dim light. "You're afraid," he said. Arin swallowed, their throat dry. "I don't know if I can do this," they admitted. Their voice was barely above a whisper. Elias studied them for a long moment before stepping inside. He moved with quiet certainty, lowering himself onto the wooden floor across from Arin. "You're at the threshold," he said. "This is where most turn back." Arin frowned. "Then maybe they're right to." Elias tilted his head. "Are they?" Silence hung between them. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small, circular mirror, setting it gently between them. "In this mirror you will see the truth," he said. "But truth is not always kind." Arin's pulse quickened. "If you look," Elias continued, "you will have to face the deepest fear you have carried all your life, the one thing you have refused to admit, even to yourself." Arin's hands trembled. "And if I don't?" "Then you may leave," Elias said. "Go back to the life you knew. You will not be punished for turning away. The choice has always been yours." Arin stared at the mirror. Their reflection stared back. At first, it was just their own weary face, dark circles beneath their eyes, lips pressed into a hard line. But then, something changed. The reflection shifted, twisted, and suddenly they weren't looking at themselves anymore. They were looking at every failure, every mistake, every shattered piece of their life staring back at them like a ghost made of all the things they could never fix. Their father's disappointed gaze, their friend's betrayal, the lover who had left, the doors that had closed. The voices of the past rose around them, a deafening chorus of everything they had ever feared. "You are not enough. You will always be alone. You are unworthy of love." A sharp sob escaped Arin's lips as they scrambled backward, away from the mirror, away from the truth clawing at their chest. Their hands dug into the wooden floor, fingers trembling. Elias's voice was calm, steady. "You have lived your entire life believing those lies." Arin shook their head violently, tears slipping down their cheeks. You let them define you," Elias continued. "You let them own you." "I don't," Arin's voice broke. "I don't know how to change it." Elias leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Then let me show you." Elias reached out, pressing a hand over Arin's heart. And suddenly the cabin was gone. Arin gasped as the world around them dissolved into nothingness, an endless void, stretching beyond what the mind could comprehend. Like a burst of golden radiance, warm and infinite, wrapping around them like a presence unseen but deeply felt. Memories flickered through the light, images of their life, not as they had remembered it, but as it truly was. Not just pain, not just failure, but growth. They saw themselves as a child, laughter spilling from their lips, long before the world told them who they had to be. They saw the moment their heart had broken, and the way it had kept beating anyway. They saw every time they had fallen, and every time they had stood back up. And in the very center of it all, love. Not from others, not from the world, but from themselves. The light wrapped around them like a whisper. You were never unworthy. The weight Arin had carried for so long, years of doubt, years of believing they were unlovable, shattered in an instant. Tears streamed down their face, but this time they weren't born from pain. They were born from release. Arin fell to their knees in the middle of the void. Hands pressed against their chest as the realization struck deep. They had spent their entire life seeking love, seeking worth, seeking something to make them whole. But the truth had been there all along. They were already enough. They had always been enough. The vision faded. Arin gasped as they were pulled back into the cabin, their bodies shaking. The fire had reignited in the hearth, flames flickering high, casting warmth across the room. Elias was still there watching them. Arin wiped at their tears, chest rising and falling in unsteady breaths. You saw it, Elias said quietly. Arin swallowed, voice hoarse. I did. Elias nodded. Then you are ready. Arin didn't ask ready for what. They already knew. For the first time in their life they felt light. For the first time they felt free. And for the first time, they were no longer afraid. Arin sat in the center of the cabin, their bodies still trembling from the vision. The weight that had once pressed against their chest, the invisible chains that had bound them for years, gone. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth. It was a stark contrast to the coldness that had once lived inside them, the numbness they had mistaken for survival. They exhaled slowly. For the first time the air didn't feel heavy. For the first time they weren't drowning in their own thoughts. Arin placed a hand over their heart, closing their eyes. The echoes of their past still existed, but they no longer held power. I forgive you. They whispered the words, unsure if they were speaking to themselves, to those who had hurt them, or to the world itself. Perhaps all three. Tears welled in their eyes, but they did not fight them. This time they were not tears of sorrow. This time they were tears of release. They thought about their father, the disappointment in his eyes, the words he had spoken that had shaped them into believing they would never be enough. I forgive you. They thought about the friend who had betrayed them, who had left them bleeding when all they had ever done was love them. I forgive you. They thought about the lover who had walked away, taking every unspoken promise with them. I forgive you. And finally they thought about themselves. The self-hatred, the guilt, the endless cycle of believing they were broken beyond repair. I forgive me. A shuddering breath escaped their lips. And with it, everything they had carried for so long. The past no longer defined them. They were no longer its prisoner. They opened their eyes, exhaling one final time. They were free. Morning light filtered through the small window, golden and warm. Arin stood at the doorway, their fingers resting against the wooden frame. The forest beyond the cabin stretched infinitely, the air crisp and alive. They had never truly seen it before. Not like this. For years the world had seemed muted, blurred by their own self-doubt and pain. But now everything was sharp, vibrant. The colors richer, the sounds crisper. Even the air tasted different, like they were breathing for the first time. A quiet step behind them made them turn. Elias stood a few feet away, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something unmistakable. Pride. You're ready, he said simply. Arin let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. I don't even know what that means anymore. Elias stepped beside them, looking out at the forest. It means you're no longer fighting yourself. Arin exhaled. He was right. The war inside them had ended. Not because they had won, but because they had let go. Elias turned to face them fully. It's time to go back. A flicker of hesitation passed through Arin. They had spent so long believing they would never belong anywhere, that they were meant to stay lost, wandering through life with no direction. But now, they weren't lost. They never had been. The path had always been there, waiting for them to finally see it. They gave a slow nod. Okay. Elias smiled. And together they stepped forward. The city was the same. The people moved through the streets, caught in the rush of their own lives. The noise, the lights, the endless motion. It was all as Arin had left it. And yet everything felt different. Because they were different. Arin stepped off the train, the wind brushing against their skin. They had thought returning would bring back the heaviness, the weight of everything they had once carried. But it didn't. The world no longer felt like a place they had to survive. It felt like a place they could finally live. As they walked through the familiar streets, something strange happened. People noticed them. Not because of what they wore or how they looked, but because of something else. Light. Presence. Something unspoken yet undeniable. A woman in the cafe they used to visit turned to look at them twice, her gaze lingering as if she sensed something different. An old acquaintance, one who had once pitied Arin, now looked at them with quiet awe instead. Even strangers glanced their way, drawn in without understanding why. Arin didn't quite understand it either, until they saw their reflection. For the first time in years, they met their own eyes without looking away. There was no sadness there, no weight, just peace. And for the first time they recognized themselves. They were whole. They had always been whole. And the world could finally see it too. The city pulsed with life around Arin, but they were no longer just another shadow in its endless motion. They walked with purpose now, not because they had all the answers but because they no longer feared the questions. Days had passed since their return, yet everything within them had shifted. The burden that had once anchored them to the past was gone, replaced by something unshakable. It was a strange thing, peace. It was not the absence of struggle, nor the erasure of pain. It was simply the acceptance of both, a trust that even in the darkest of times, something greater was always at work. And for the first time in their life, Arin truly believed. Not in the way they once did, half-heartedly, desperately, as if faith was something to be begged for. Well, now they understood. Faith was not waiting for the world to give them proof. Faith was knowing that they had always been guided, even when they could not see it. Love was not something they had to chase, to earn, or to fear losing. Love had always been within them. And trust, was the greatest act of courage. To surrender, not in weakness, but in the understanding that they were never alone. They thought back to the letter, to the first whisper of a voice that had led them here. It had never been calling them away from their life. It had been calling them home. That night, Arin stood on the rooftop of their apartment building, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The wind curled around them, whispering like an old friend. They closed their eyes. And then they heard it. A voice. But this time it was not distant. Not separate. It was not calling them anymore. It was them. You are not searching anymore. A shiver ran down their spine. Because you have become what you were looking for. Arin exhaled, their chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the universe itself. They understood now. The voice had never been an external force, some divine entity watching over them from afar. It had always been within them, waiting, guiding, speaking in the quiet moments, in the stillness, in the pauses between each heartbeat. They were no longer just a seeker. They had become the message. The same light that had led them out of the darkness now burned within them, and it was time to share it. Dawn had barely begun to touch the sky as Arin hiked up the mountain path. It was a place they had once come to escape. Now they came to begin. Each step felt lighter, as if the earth itself recognized them now, as if it knew they were no longer weighed down by the ghosts of who they had been. By the time they reached the summit, the horizon was beginning to glow, a soft, golden fire stretching across the sky. Arin closed their eyes and breathed deeply. Everything they had lost, everything they had feared, everything they had once believed was beyond them, it had all led here. To this moment. To this version of themselves. They weren't perfect. They weren't without scars. But they were whole. And for the first time in their life they were ready. Ready to live. Ready to love. Ready to lead others toward the same light that had saved them. The sun broke over the horizon, its warmth spilling across their skin. Arin smiled. They had finally arrived.